Hey, welcome, buddy, to another edition of DEFCON 1 Science. I know it's been a while. We've had so many different things going on. This was kind of even a spur of the moment kind of show. So please bear with me. I've lost my original layout. I have to get that from Kyle. So, yeah, I'm kind of going bare bones, but I kind of wanted to do this particular hangout because I had Dr. Garte available. And we had a couple conversations prior on beliefs and how beliefs relate to science, and especially what the things, what it means to believe, as far as epistemologically what it means to believe something, and what it means to have faith. And of course, people might know by now, Dr. Garte is a theist, and he has religious convictions, and he separates those from his scientific beliefs. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about the distinction about what it means to have one type of belief and then a different kind of belief, like the belief that, like God exists as far as a personal belief, and then what it means to have a scientific belief in something. So anyways, Dr. Cart, welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm starting to get that sound now again. Remember the sound that we talked about before? But it's not that bad. I think we can work with it. It's not that bad. But anyway, so kind of refresh people's memory of who you are and your background. If they don't know you by now, then they're living in a rock. But
my name is Cy Garte. I'm a PhD in biochemistry, retired scientist. I'm also a Christian, and I tweet a lot and other stuff. But we can get into that later if we need to. I can switch computers, Steve.
No, I think it's gonna be okay.
We're okay. Okay.
And people saw your patch. I'm just gonna. Do you want to tell them briefly, or?
I took off the video, but I just came down with something called Bell's palsy a couple of months ago. It also affects my speech a little. Partial paralysis of the face, but it goes away after a while. So. Thanks for your concern, if anyone's concerned.
They are concerned. They're going nuts in the live chat right now.
Okay. But it's not a serious issue. It just affects my eye a little bit.
So where do you want to start? Let's maybe kind of give people a kind of a preview of what actually happened, because what actually happened was I had been tagged on a Twitter post along with Matt Dillahunty, and somehow you took that post and you kind of ran with it. It's been kind of a cluster ever since, right?
Yeah, well, I think it was a cluster before I got involved, and maybe even after. But it generated a lot of discussion. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it led to what Matt Dillahunty was saying. Was that you either believe or you don't believe, right? And in classical logic, that would be the case, and I'm not ever disputing that. I had pointed out that I do believe that regular classical logic is insufficient to really describe beliefs. I think that you'd have to use something like a multi-valued system, or fuzzy logic, or doxastic logic, or a combination of all of them, because beliefs, as people keep telling me, and I keep telling them, are messy. They're really, really messy. And I don't think pigeonholing them into a two-value system works very well. But if we're going to use a two-value system, then yeah, you either believe or you don't believe. That would be a dichotomy, right?
Right.
So I actually wrote a blog giving a condition where you might believe and not believe at the same time, using a state of irrationality, yes, but logically not impossible, at least as far as I've seen so far. But that's kind of what led into this discussion that we were talking about, because, I think people conflate when we talk about beliefs and knowledge epistemologically with faith. And I think it's, I see a lot of theists do it, but I also see a lot of atheists try to do it as well. They don't understand when the theist is talking about faith, they're talking about a religious conviction, not talking about a scientific one. So you want to explain the difference to people, maybe?
Well, I think the problem is the word belief, which has some very potent connotations in some contexts, especially the context of theism. And so when Matt was saying either you believe or you don't believe, that was, something that we can't necessarily argue with very strongly when you're talking about, God, or you're talking about theism in general, and many other beliefs. I mean, you could use things like veganism or democracy. There are a lot of there are a lot of beliefs out there that people hold very strongly, and some people believe in them and some people don't. And there's not much in between, perhaps. But the word belief can also almost be a synonym for, I think something is true. And when it is used that way, and it's used that way in many languages, and it's used that way, for example, in science. If we ask scientists questions about certain ideas that are current but have not yet been resolved, and that's a huge number of such ideas. Most scientists will say, well, I'm not really sure. I think the evidence is favoring this, but I don't know. I believe that's probably true, or I think that's probably true. And that's a different kind of belief. If they say, I believe that's probably true, they're not saying it the way a theist would say, I believe in God, or an atheist would say, I don't have any reason to believe in God.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that word belief entails different things to different people. Same with knowledge,
Exactly.
right? I mean, there's different ways we attach various linguistic meanings to these words. Like, for example, even the word knowledge. In one type of knowledge, right, there's something called a belief condition in the strong form, where if you believe something to be true, you actually have certainty that it's true. So if I say that I know
Right.
P, it also means I have certainty of P. But that's only in a strong belief conditional state, which I don't particularly hold to, and very few people do. But
Right.
when you hear it on the street, I know something to be the case. An average person will attach that strong belief condition, and they say, "Oh, that person is certain of it." And the same,
Right.
by the same token, when somebody says they believe something, it doesn't sound as strong as knowing. But of course, to know something, you have to believe something, right? So if you ask
Right.
me what time it is, I can look directly at my watch and I see it's 3 o'clock, and I can say, "Hey, I believe it's 3 o'clock," but really, I'm saying, I should say, like, I know it's 3 o'clock because I'm having evidence that it's three. I can see it's, I'm justified to say it's three, unless my watch is broken, and then in case I don't have knowledge, which is a giddy air problem we can get into, maybe,
Right.
But yeah, these words have different meaning to different cultures as well. In Japan, they use the difference between think and believe. They're more willing to say they think something's the case rather than they believe something's the case.
Yeah, and as I said, I think it's not just even within one culture, the word belief will have different meanings depending on the context. So as I said, the example you gave, which is, I believe it's 3 o'clock. Really, you're saying, I think it's 3 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
You don't believe, you don't have a belief system built around the time of day as you would, for example, if you believe in some sort of paradigm like theism, or you know you believe in being nice to people, or whatever it is. That's a different meaning. So it's one culture, but the word is tricky. So I think that's the first thing to straighten out. And when I first saw Matt's comment about either you believe or you don't believe, my initial reaction was, no, that's not true, because I think I generally think scientifically, and that's definitely not the case in science. Most people, looking at a controversy, will say, "Well, I'm not sure," and that's one of the things that you brought up in your discussion of agnosticism, in terms of the question of theistic belief or not belief, or lack of being sure which way to put it. So, and that agnostic view is very dominant, for example, in scientific discussion. It takes a long time before a new belief system in science becomes ingrained in all the people who call themselves scientists, because it takes a lot of evidence for someone to say, well, I now believe that this version of the theory is true and that one isn't. And the example I like to give relates to the origin of life. There are, for decades, that whole very open question has been split into two camps. The people who believe that our life began with replicators, and the people who believe that life began with metabolism. And the reason one says belief here is because there's not a lot of data. So it really is belief. There's not a lot of actual knowledge. So what you have is camps, like you have in so many other areas of life, where you have replicators who believe that and they have reasons to believe it, and there are metabolism first people who believe that. And, one group will abandon its belief and go to the other group as soon as very persuasive data comes along, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I definitely think that people change their minds as information is acquired, new information is acquired. But
they should.
The only difference I would say is if you're not convinced of something, then you don't have a belief, right? Because I do agree with Matt on the dichotomy that either you believe or you don't believe in a normal rational state, right? Without using some form of irrationality where you're holding contradictory positions. That would be the norm. If I'm just not fully convinced, then I don't have that belief. So if I say, hey, does a general theory of relativity describe gravity? If I can't answer yes to that question, then I don't have a belief that statement is true, right? So any other thing relating to probabilities or uncertainty would be a no, and you don't have the belief that gravity is described by general theory of relativity. So I think Matt's right on that, but I think Matt is very myopic in his views, and he just pigeonholes things. And I understand he probably does that because he gets a lot of messages, but when somebody is trying to speak in a more nuanced way, it gets lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he, not only he, but I think a lot of the people on that thread didn't catch all your nuances. And I caught them. I didn't understand them all, but I did catch them. So I knew that it is important to pay attention to what you were.
Yeah, and they like to jump on the bandwagon. Like he got like 88 likes, and I got like 3.
Well, he's him and you're you. What can I say?
It's okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that when people look and they dive into these topics, they're going to realize that they're a lot more complicated than they could ever imagine. I read 4 papers in the last week, and my head's still spinning from them. Okay, so they're not easy topics dealing with beliefs and knowledge. I'm going to be doing a blog post next on can we know if we're not a brain in a vat using what's called epistemic closure, and do we need to deny it? And it's a fascinating topic. And it uses modus ponens, modus tollens, and a few other things. And you know what? And I got to tell you, so I might actually be changing my position a little bit on the whole brain of the bat thing. Maybe.
I didn't hear the last part. Sorry.
I said I might be changing my position on the brain of the vat thing. I've really had to sit down and think about this because I've always denied a certain premise, meaning that I can say that I know I'm not a brain in a vat. But by denying that premise, I'm holding to epistemic closure. But the more I'm reading about it, I'm thinking that I might actually have to deny epistemic closure and choose a different premise to deny. But if that's the case, I can't say that I know that we're not a brain in a vat any longer if I go that route.
Well, yeah, that's one of those questions that is interesting from a logician point of view, but I have to say that scientists don't pay a lot of attention to it.
No, and nor should they. I mean,
part of our purview.
but scientists pay attention to philosophy when it comes to like the scientific method, right? I mean, they understand that. Yeah. I mean, as a scientist and even as a theist, you are always looking for a naturalistic explanation. I mean, as a scientist, positing a deity is not a naturalistic explanation. Whether that be the root cause, okay, fine. I don't even particularly have an issue with that. You know that. It's just in science I hold very strongly to we can't say that a demon did it. We can't say that a ghost did it. We can't say that God did it. These are all supernatural causations. They have no mechanistic way of understanding if that was the case, right?
Right. Well, that's right. I mean, a single human being like myself, who's both a scientist and a Christian, can say, let's say the origin of the universe, I can say, I believe that God did it, but I don't say it as a scientific statement. That's very important.
I think it's hugely important. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's critical that people understand that. Because if a theist is not positing it as a scientific claim, then asking for scientific evidence for it seems to me to be a straw man.
Thank you. Yeah, I should pin that as my top tweet.
I think I have tweeted that before, did I?
You have.
Yeah.
You have, and I have too. I mean, a lot of people have. I mean, Sarah, I don't know. You know Sarah.
I do know Sarah. Right? Yeah, she's a PhD in astrophysics.
She has posted that often, and it's a simple statement of truth, but a lot of people just reject it or don't accept it, or they don't understand it.
I think what happens when they, and I see this a lot, it's unfortunate. Whenever somebody like a theist tweets out certain things, people will just denied by fiat. I see it happen with you. I've seen it happen with Sarah and SJ and a whole bunch of other people. And you know me, I do like to consider myself to be a much more critical thinker. I don't subscribe to any tribalistic notions. I don't go running with the group. Matter of fact, I go against the grain a lot because of my personal held convictions. But when I see a theist, say something, and you just have an atheist jump all over it, and then I'm like, wait a minute, what is wrong with what they said? Matter of fact, what they said is correct. If they're not positing it as a scientific belief, then you can't attack it as such.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I mean, look, there's what a lot of people don't understand, and it's not their fault. There's no reason why they would know this, but all scientists know it. There's a huge amount of controversy within science, nothing to do with religion or theism or anything else. Just within science, as soon as you begin doing research in any field, you find out that you're walking into a controversial area, and that has to be because nobody in science talks about, gee, the second law is really true. That's already known. That's not interesting. What's interesting is the stuff that isn't known, and so that always generates a tremendous amount of controversy. And so what we're used to is sort of debating, but in a very different way than the debates I've now become used to on Twitter or anywhere else on social media. And that is that the debates, and you've heard this from people like Aaron Ra and probably Matt Dillahunty also, in science, the debates are not based on, quoting other people and trying to prove things with logic. The debates are based on published evidence, period. And people change their minds. No one is completely wedded to something. And again, here we have this difference in belief system. I currently believe that probably replication did not come first in the origin of life. I used to believe it very strongly that it did. I was definitely in the replicator camp. Now I'm in a state where I don't know. So, that happens all the time with scientific controversies. And so that's what, I'm used to, people like Sarah used to. We're not used to these arguments, I've just shown you're illogical, so you're wrong. I mean, that's a whole nother way of arguing about things that I'm really not comfortable with.
Well, that's the Twitter style, right? And
everywhere. Also Facebook. I mean,
and Facebook,
And I don't remember the time. I mean, I should because I'm old enough, but I don't remember how people yelled at each other before social media. But there must have been.
They had an operator dial them up. Can you dial 611-5000 Pennsylvania or whatever?
Right. Yeah. So it's probably always been that way. In politics, for example, you have this to the extreme degree.
I'll give you an example. You had mentioned the second law of thermodynamics, which I took a little thermodynamics, nothing advanced, but basic stuff. But I knew enough to understand that the second law of thermodynamics really does apply to all systems in some way. Yes, overall, the net increase of the universe entropy has to go up. That is true. But I tried to explain to somebody on Twitter one time who claimed to have a PhD, which, by the way, I found out later they lied. They don't. They have no education in this, I don't think. But I tried to explain to him that you can use what's called multi-domain modeling, where you take individual isolated parts of a system and treat them as isolated, and you just take like a summation. So basically, you're applying the second law over an entire system because you're just treating isolated things, and this is common.
Exactly.
This is something that you can go read about, right? And
it's also why we're alive, by the way.
Yeah, life wouldn't exist without this ability to do that. Ratcheting, right? When we have evolution, the ability to do ratcheting, you can have complex things formed like a snowflake or evolution, so long as you have a localized entropy, but the sun's entropy is going to go up, and the net universe overall is going to go up, right?
Exactly.
And so I tried to explain this to him, and he just was like, you're wrong. I'm like, okay, give me a citation. Nothing. You're wrong. And he blocked me like 4 times. And he would block me and then unblock me. And I called him out again on something else that he was wrong on, and he blocked me. And I just think it's cute, right? It's like, okay, you're going to block me because I'm telling you stuff that any idiot can go look up in first year physics. And yet, you people are like, well, no, he has a PhD. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't.
Well, I mean, the reason I said it's why you're alive, I remember learning that there are some biochemical reactions that create a great deal of complexity, and entropy goes down quite a bit
Hmm.
when these reactions take place. So the question is, how do they go? And the answer is that the reactions not only create some new structures or new complex molecules, but they also change the local entropy of the water molecules around these reactions. And as you were just saying, that change is very highly entropic. And so when you add the two together, the net result is an increase in entropy. So that drives the reaction.
Absolutely.
And it's not the kind of thing that you would think about unless you actually studied it carefully. So, yeah, a lot of these arguments about the second law, and some people will say the same thing is true for quantum mechanics. It's kind of hard to use these too glibly. You kind of have to know what they really say in order to use them.
Yeah, no, I don't mind somebody throwing something out there with a little bit of citation. That's fine. But when I get somebody who wants to
Yeah.
argue that they're absolutely right with no citation whatsoever,
Well,
I kind of
exactly.
question that.
I almost tweeted. I got into an argument with somebody, and I decided not to tweet it, but I almost tweeted, look, if you disagree with me about religion, fine. That, you may be right, I may be right, I don't know. If you disagree with me about science, you better use a citation.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you repeat that again for the people who may not have heard that the first time?
If you disagree with me about religion or anything else of that type, that's no problem. We can argue back and forth. But if you disagree with what I say about science, especially, say, biochemistry, which I know pretty well, you better have a citation, because just saying I don't agree with you is meaningless.
And that's what I get all the time. And when I ask people for citations, 9 times out of 10, I get muted, blocked, or ignored. It's ubiquitous. I'm not even kidding. People make fun of me. I use that word a lot, and I like that word because it works well for a lot of situations. But yeah, I ask people for citations, and if you notice on Twitter, I provide citations. I give peer review papers. I give college textbooks. I give PhDs in the area that we're talking about. These are citations. And by the way, the next person who tells me that's a fallacious use of appeal to authority, I'm going to mock incessantly till the day they die. You've written peer review papers before. What do you do when you have a peer review paper and you cite somebody? I mean, you do not cite them and put a little thing and say, okay, I'm referring to this person who's an expert in the field or their research as support for your own. That's not a fallacious appeal to authority.
Oh my God! No, look, I've published 215 peer-reviewed papers in my life.
Oh, good grief!
And I've reviewed probably twice that many. And I've been cited many, many times. I cite many, many people. Let me tell you this way. Here's how a scientific paper is structured. It has to be structured. You start with an introduction. The introduction should have at least 20 citations to references. If it doesn't have roughly that number, it could be 10, it could be 50, it doesn't matter. But if you have no references in your introduction, that paper won't even be considered, because nobody talks about something in a vacuum. If you're writing a scientific paper where you did some research and you have something to say, you have to refer to everything else that's been said in that field. Not everything, but as much as you possibly can that's germane and recent. And the quality of the references is a key part in determining whether a paper will get published.
And I like how you put that, because the Quine thesis actually says the exact same thing. Doing Quine thesis, that the hypotheses don't exist in a vacuum. So
no, it's impossible.
Yeah, so it's exactly the case.
There are people who will come up with what they think is a brilliant idea. They will write it down and not cite anybody else and send it to a journal, and then surprised that it comes back the next day because the editor won't even send it out for review. So, there's no such thing as somebody coming up with a brilliant idea alone in a vacuum and never talks about what anybody else said on the issue, because that's guaranteed to be wrong.
Yeah, you can't. Everything's derivative. I mean, even my blog posts are derivative. I mean, I like to come up with my own novel ideas, but I draw upon from papers that I read, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I cite them. Like the last one, I actually cited the paper I read.
If you think about it, we do that all. I mean, everybody does. We don't cite things as religiously as you do in science, but who comes up with something brand new, absolutely 100% original that is nothing to do with what anyone has ever said before. I mean, I've never heard of that, whether it's a blog post or a book or
It would
even
be
a
pretty
non-peer
novel.
reviewed
Yeah,
essay.
literally.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. I mean, you may forget that you read something about it sometime, but everything is connected. But in science, it's absolutely vital. If you neglect a important reference that bears on what you're talking about, your paper will be rejected and your grant will be rejected.
How do you remember writing 200 and some odd papers? I couldn't even imagine that. I've written like maybe 20 blog posts, and I'd be hard pressed to tell you what I wrote in half of them.
Well, I didn't write them all. I'm an author on that many. I'm not the writer of them all. I participated in the research. So when you do that, you get your name on a paper. I've probably written less than half of those myself.
But still,
But
that's a lot of work, though.
well, that's what you do when you're a scientist. That's the job.
I couldn't imagine. To me, I would be thrilled to write one paper. If I ever got published one paper, I would be having a party, right? The closest I ever came, people may not know this, but recently I got mentioned in the Journal of Creation. I think
No
no, I did. It was the 40, I think, quarterly. It comes out quarterly. It's the third quarter.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to tell you that doesn't count, Steve.
I got mentioned by Dr. Humphreys, and I got mentioned by the editor in the very first thing it says. It talks about me in the great debate community, and I'm like, that's the closest I'm ever going to get to being published in a journal, quote unquote.
Oh, you never know. You never know.
But it's okay. But I'm still in awe when people say that they published a peer review paper, because I could just imagine what goes into that. Must be
it's a lot
ridiculously
of work,
rigorous.
Usually, I mean, I could give a lecture on what it's like to get papers published, but not to mention grants funded, which is also peer review, and that I'm sort of an expert on because that was my job for 6 years. But for getting papers published, you write the paper. I just sent one off. My latest one I sent off about 2 weeks ago to a journal. And then you wait, and after a month or two, you get back comments from reviewers, 2 or 3 reviewers, and it goes everywhere from "this is a piece of junk, don't even think about publishing it," and you get rejected, to "it's pretty good, you'd only need a few minor revisions to get it published." I think I've only had one paper published without any revisions at all in the whole career, and that's fairly common.
That's got to be really unusual, because I have a friend, Dr. Gary Leschelt, and he's trying to get something published through the Journal of Creation too, in refutation for Dr. Humphreys, and he's had it rejected now twice, major edits, but he finally is going to try something else of an actual peer review process, because he said that the editor clearly didn't understand what he was saying. He didn't seem like they understood the topic, and I know Dr. Leschelt knows his stuff. I mean, he's well published as well.
That journal, Steve, is not peer reviewed. It's one of the big arguments that by we I mean theistic evolutionists like me, evolutionary creationists, the BioLogos crowd. That's not peer reviewed either, but we admit it, because now there is a very good peer reviewed journal about science and Christian faith, which is the journal. It's called Perspectives in Science and Christian Faith. And it is peer reviewed, but it's not a science journal. It's specifically for
and I'm okay with that, to be honest with you. I have no issue with that. If it doesn't claim to be a scientific thing, but it's peer reviewed by experts. I mean, I have a friend, as you know, Dr. Kenny Rhodes, who's a theologian, and I have the utmost respect for. He would want something to be something along the lines of, okay, there's a difference between saying peer review, God exists, and peer review is, this is what a theologian would probably say given the conditions of, like, let's talk about Peter or talk about Paul or specificities when it comes to the Bible. I think there's a consensus there among theologians that I don't take for granted, right?
I mean, the fact is that theology is an area of scholarship.
Sure, absolutely.
And peer review simply means, and peer review occurs not just in science, it occurs in historical journals and philosophical journals and sociological journals. And what it is that other scholars who are your peers review what you wrote. And so you can get peer review in any field. And it just simply means that you wrote something and you referenced other people, and hopefully including the reviewers, because that always helps, although you don't know in advance. and they will check that. And if what you're saying is not nonsense, but actually is useful, they will approve it. So, yeah, peer review is not limited to science, but it's very, very important in science.
So what do you think happens when somebody they discount your scientific knowledge because of your theistic beliefs? Because that drives me nuts when I see that. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a person who gets a degree of any kind has to work very hard to do it. And to get a PhD is you're automatically in God mode with me. So for somebody to discount somebody's scientific knowledge because of their theistic beliefs, I personally can't stand that. I think it's reprehensible in some ways.
I came up with a policy a while ago, which I adhere to continuously, and that is I do have a lot of atheists who follow me and who talk to me and argue with me and discuss things with me in different tones. And I will accept all of that unless they specifically reject, as you said, reject my science, but do it in an insulting way. So I've had people call me fraud and dishonest and liar and you don't really have a degree and you blah blah blah, all kinds of things. Those people I block immediately and always.
Yeah, I don't blame you. No, I really don't blame you. In fact, I kind of do the same thing.
And I have that. I learned a very good thing from Sarah Salvianda. She has on her blog a thing called frequently asked questions. And on there are all the standard answers to the standard questions. How can you be a scientist and believe in God? So I have 11 points. And I also have ground rules where I say very clearly that if you call me a fraud or a liar or what any of these moron or any of these other things, that's it. We're done forever. If you don't, I will try to answer you if I can. Sometimes I don't because I don't always have time. But that's the way I deal with that. There's no point in me engage. I don't have any interest or reason to engage with people who tell me that I'm not a real scientist. That's just silly. I mean, they can look me up like anybody else.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be having
it's all publicly available. So
yeah, I'm definitely going to. I'm making a page for that very thing.
It's a good idea. Yeah, and then you can just link it. So when somebody says to you, "Are you the only scientist who believes in God?" You just link that page, and there's a whole list. And anything they want to know, any of those simple questions can be easily answered that way.
Yeah, when somebody questions my honor and my integrity, I give them basically one shot to correct that, and then I block them. I'm not playing with that.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good.
There's thousands of people on the internet that you deal with, and there's billions of people around the world. So if I block one or two people, or maybe a couple dozen, because they're just being pricks that just want to question my integrity rather than talk about my argument, no loss, dude. No loss.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and I don't know if I ever tweeted this. I think I did. When I'm kind of old. I just turned 71, and so I go way back, and way before the internet, of course. And when I first got on the internet, I was very shocked, not just on Twitter, but even a little bit on Facebook, at the idea of anonymous people insulting other people, with impunity.
Right.
And I don't get it. And I guess the reason I don't get it is because I grew up in a time and place where when you insult somebody, you took your life in your hands.
Oh yeah, no, I know those days. I mean, I've been beat down in a bar for saying something. Yeah.
So the idea that somebody says, "Well, you're a fucking idiot, stupid moron," I mean, wow. That's a lot of courage, to be able to say something like that. I mean, that shows you kind of come from a background that's quite foreign to me. So I don't understand this lack of politeness. And there's times when I get a little bit out of hand myself, I admit it. But I would never say anything like that to somebody. I couldn't do it.
Well, the problem is that they don't have the intellectual capacity to really argue on certain things. I mean, do you think that any of them is going to go against you head to head in biochemistry? That'd be ridiculous, right?
Yeah, well, it's happening.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean,
it's happening from both atheists and theists, by the way.
I don't understand that, though. I mean, that's your area, and and you don't have, no matter what a person's individual beliefs are, science doesn't change. I mean, do the basic laws of chemistry and physics change because you have a different belief? No. I mean, if you're gonna balance an equation, is going to make a difference if you think one way or another about a something about theology? No, you're going to be exactly the same.
That's right.
But I get the same thing with my blog. People just discount what I write in my blog, rather than having to talk about it, because most of them aren't going to understand the topic. And I get that, but then at that point you just say, look, I don't understand the topic. I don't have a refutation for your argument because I don't know it well enough to even provide one. I'm happy to say that in many cases,
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people don't want to, they think they're losing face by doing that.
I guess. But anyway, I think we've gotten a little off topic. I don't know where we...
Well, let's move back to biochemistry a little bit, since that is your area. What exactly, like, do you think, how should I say this? When people talk about the word belief, and they talk about it in the terms of just like faith, like a religious faith, talk about a little bit from a scientific point of, like you said, scientists don't really use the word belief something. If they do, they mean it in a lot different way, right? They believe it to be the case, but they're not certain of it. They're not stating it as a fact. They're not stating it with any kind of surety or absolute conviction, right?
Correct. Well, there are a few exceptions which prove the rule. For example, there is a scientist, I think he's still active in California, who resisted the concept that AIDS is caused by a virus for many years. He refused to believe it. And he believed, and this is using the correct word, he believed that AIDS was a disease caused by drug use. And that belief was is irrational, unscientific, and it turned out deadly, because he was able to convince the health establishment of the Republic of South Africa that he was correct. And the result was that millions of people contracted AIDS when they wouldn't have otherwise. So that's an example of a, quote, scientific belief based on nothing. I should say based not on nothing, but not based on scientific evidence, because the scientific evidence is overwhelming the other way. And there have been some other cases like that where you have a rogue scientist. The other example, this was a little worse because this was based on financial fraud, but the English scientist who published a paper claiming that autism was a result
Wakefield?
of vaccination. Wakefield, yeah. Mm-hmm. That was simply fraud, and it was proven to be fraud. But again, he and his followers believed this, again, in defiance of all the evidence from everywhere else. So those things happen. They're very rare, luckily. And usually it's exactly what you said. When a scientist says, I believe that's true, he means I think it's true. It's not a strong belief. It's that, yeah, I think the weight of the evidence is on this side. But, he or she can be easily convinced with sufficient evidence and references that that's not true.
Yeah, but look how much damage is done because of that.
I'm sorry, Steve. I was talking over you. Go ahead.
No. I thought you had a pause. Please continue.
No, I mean, I have. I published a paper once that said something about a particular gene, and I was wrong. And it wasn't that I was dishonest or that I did anything. I just came to the conclusion too soon. And a colleague of mine wrote a paper showing that I was wrong, that gene didn't do what I thought it did. And she was right. And, didn't bother me. These things happen. I didn't feel any loss of face or, loss of reputation. People make mistakes all the time. What counts is what you said before, is that when you're in science, the truth is what it is. It's not what you'd like it to be or what you believe it to be. And the only hard part is getting to that truth. But once you get there, we're done. There's no more controversy. Everybody agrees.
Unless you're a young Earth creationist, and then But I have not met a young Earth creationist that actually understands science very well. It's just concerning because even when you have a professional on, like we had Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson on, who is a legit PhD. Smart. Yeah, he's not an idiot by any stretch of imagination, but I think he compartmentalizes to the point of he has to recognize at some point that his theories and his ideas don't hold water with actual science. I think he does have to recognize that at some point.
Yeah, there are quite a few by quite a few, though, I'm talking about small numbers still, like, maybe a dozen. But there are a number of fine scientists who work for the Institute for Creation Research. Some of them are honest enough to say, and I don't want to mention their names because I don't like quoting people unless I actually have the quote in front of me, but at least 2 or 3 of them have said, I know that this goes against the scientific consensus, but I believe that God and the Bible is reliable, is more reliable than the scientific consensus. So I'll say it anyway.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I don't have a problem mentioning names. Dr. Wood is one of those people that will say that.
Dr. Wood is one of them, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so I know exactly what you're talking about.
And there are a couple of others.
Yeah, there's a couple of others, and so yes, there are people that are out there that are at least, relatively speaking, at least enough intellectual honesty to say, yes, I agree that the overwhelming evidence is that the Earth is old. There's evidence of evolution, yes. Right. But, however, I take it to be the case that the Bible takes superiority when it comes to these matters, and therefore I'm going to believe that the Bible says the Earth is 6,000 years old, and therefore we have all the science, but for some reason it must be wrong, and they'll posit things like maybe God just made a period like that.
That's actually not a bad argument. It's just a very bad scientific argument.
It's a horrible scientific argument.
Okay. It's a non-existent scientific argument.
It's last Thursday.
As an argument, for example, as a theological argument, it's okay. Where I disagree with that argument is that I don't think the Bible is telling them what they think it's telling them. I also believe in the Bible. I'm a Christian. I'm a theist. I also believe the Bible is inerrant. But I don't think it's telling them what they say it's telling them. I don't think the Bible is something that you read it in English and you say, okay, it says here that, on the 3rd day this happened. I don't think the Bible is telling us that it happened on the 3rd day. But, that's the theology. That's not a scientific statement.
Now, I was curious because you say that, like the Bible's inerrant. Do you mean infallible or inerrant? Because they're kind of two different things.
I don't mean infallible. I don't even know how that would work in this context. Inerrant is also not a good word, and some people, for example, my wife keeps telling me not to use that, but I mean it. I'm probably the only one who accepts this definition. By inerrant, I mean I do believe it's the word of God translated by humans, which means it's already somewhat off. And however, I do believe that it's God inspired, and in that way is inerrant. It's not wrong. But I think that we are very errant, and I mean us, alive today. I believe people who wrote it were errant. They probably didn't get it all right. Why would they? I mean, if God had lectured to them about, about the singularity at the origin of the universe, I don't think they would have known what to write. So, it's the best it can be. And there's probably a lot of wrong stuff in there due to human error. But in general, I don't think that the creationists are wrong in trusting to the Bible. I think what they're wrong in is trusting to their interpretation of the Bible.
Real quickly, the difference, inerrant means that there are no errors in the Bible. Infallible means there cannot be any errors in the Bible. And I think that's impossible because we know there's scribal errors. There's spelling errors, there's scribal errors. Matthew has one place has earthy rather than earthly, so the L is missing. It's a typo, but it exists in the King James Version. So that is an error. I mean, it's a typographic error, but the theists I know will generally say that the message is what's infallible, not so much.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, not because linguistically, we know the King James Version has problems. In fact, some of the other Bibles say, hey, we're not even going to include parts of this, or we're going to include them in red because we don't even know the authenticity of it. We know that there's scribal errors in some of the dates. We know that, again, in Matthew, I think it's it's 1548, it says like a man is something as earthy, and it's supposed to say earthly, and that L is missing from. And you go to the other versions, you'll see it, right? So, yeah, those are just typographical errors. So I don't have a problem with that. That's why I just want to clarify what something mean by infallible.
The age of the earth, which is never stated in the Bible, it's interpreted from the genealogy data. It's in the Bible, but that's an interpretation. It's a second, So when the young Earth creationists say that they take the Bible literally, that is absolutely not true. They don't. They interpret and they do the same kind of interpretation that everybody else does and has always done. It's a very difficult set of books to understand.
Yeah, I don't think they take it literally.
The Old Testament or the New Testament. So the idea that the Bible is what it says, no, it's not. It's clearly not. And because what it says is very difficult to understand. Yeah. That's my own view, my own personal view.
I can agree with that. And the reason I would say that is because of this. I don't think they take it literally, because if any one of them had never heard of Ussher's chronology, and they may have never heard of it, but they use it for sure. They may not know where that chronology came from, but they definitely know of it, right? But if you didn't have any idea what the age of the earth was, no clue whatever, and you had only the Bible to tell you, I'm sorry, you're not going to get 6,000 years out of it.
And that was, in fact, exactly the case before Ussher came up with this. If you look at the earlier church fathers, they never talked about a 6,000-year-old earth. Right. They had no idea what the age of the earth was.
Right, because you can't derive that from the Bible alone without adding your own kind of methodology to it. And Ussher, by the way, skipped a lot of things. He assumed, one generation led to a next generation, but the biblical scholars tell me there's massive gaps in those things. Yeah, yes. So it doesn't work out too well.
No.
I know we're kind of. I don't want to keep you too long because I know that you have. You're busy today. But let me ask. We got a couple questions from the audience. Let's get those out of the way.
Sure.
Trevor had asked you, have you ever earned a Erdos number, or know what it is? An Erdos number is a word for mathematics, though. But I mean, if you get it for doing collaborations with mathematicians.
No, I don't collaborate with mathematicians. I wish I did. It would help me in what I'm working on now. But no, unfortunately, and this is one of my pet peeves forever, molecular biologists in particular and biologists in general are exceedingly unmathematical and exceedingly untheoretical. And it's something I've never liked, and I've had big fights and arguments with other biologists on this issue. I've actually published several papers in something called the Journal of Theoretical Biology, and which is a pretty good journal now, but it had a pretty low impact factor when I started publishing in it. And I remember once at a conference, one of my colleagues said to me, "Journal of Theoretical Biology, that's an oxymoron."
That's probably why I had a low impact factor. But I got my own question for you. Biochemistry. Do you think it's more biology or chemistry? The hardest question is going to be asked of all time.
I don't know.
It's a hard question, though, isn't it? It's not as easy as people make it out to be.
I was a chemistry major in college. My bachelor's degree is in chemistry. I didn't like biology because it was too much memorization. I didn't really care for that. So I tend to like the chemical aspects, but you have to know some biology to do biochemistry. That's true.
So I say when I hear biochemistry, I think biological pathways. I think of metabolic pathways. A lot of them, right?
Obviously. Chemical.
And there's chemical reactions. Yeah, and so anybody who looks at those pathways, it's mind-boggling. It's just how you could ever memorize this from one human being is beyond my comprehension to ever do.
Yeah. I took an exam on that in graduate school. I had to know every single.
No way.
Synthetic pathway for every one of the 20 amino acids. That was unbelievable.
The only thing I can compare it to is on my oral review board for my nuclear qualifications. They could ask anything that we've been exposed to, right? And one of the first questions I got asked was draw the entire electrical distribution plant, including all breakers and sub-breakers. And I'm not even an electrician, right? And I got asked that question. So I'm drawing like the SSMG. I'm drawing this circuit breaker over here has these breakers over here, and this goes to this, and this goes to that. And, then they're asking, okay, well, how does the formulas work for this? And I'm like, okay. And it took up, like, you've been in the classroom where you see, like, MIT, you see, like, 5 different boards with writing on it. Mm-hmm. By the time I got done, it was much like that, right?
Yeah,
an
well,
hour
and it's
later.
not that different from biosynthetic pathways. I mean, it is the same kind of complexity. So,
I
not
put it
by
more for
accident.
chemistry though. I think biochemistry is more chemistry than biology, but
Yeah,
obviously
I agree.
they're definitely interrelated. But one
Mm.
of these days, when you're feeling better, I'd love to actually have you come on and actually do a basic presentation on stoichiometric chemistry or something,
Oh,
or
okay.
I don't know anything. I took stoichiometric chemistry. I kind of maybe vaguely recall some of the stuff. Not my area that I ever knew about. I memorized
Well,
it, and
there
regurgitated
is
it and forgot
there
it.
is one area of biochemistry that I'm quite passionate about, and that I've actually written a couple of papers about in the philosophical theological context. And that is an area that is incredibly beautiful and not very well known, which is has to do with DNA, but not the way DNA replicates itself, which is kind of interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
the way DNA codes for all the phenotype of the cell. And that's required for evolution. So when we talk about evolution, people tend to think about it as natural selection, which is true, and tend to think about mutations, which is true. But the real essence of evolution depends on a biochemical mechanism, which is the way proteins are synthesized, and that's called translation. And it's an incredibly beautiful process. You can find it online. Just look for a video on translation, and you'll find lots of videos, and none of them show the whole process. They all show parts of it, and even those parts are amazingly beautiful and complex.
Like I imagine it's pretty complicated to try to describe like protein folding being encoded in DNA because the DNA will code, and you have the transcription, then you'll go through the messenger RNA to
Mm-hmm.
translation. So once you have that translation and it's in the ribosome and it's being produced as a polypeptide and it's being shot out, right? Then after it's created, it has to fold itself to be a functional
Right,
protein.
right.
That process I've once tried to understand. I couldn't get
It's
past day one. It is
it's
the
not
most
completely understood at this
it
point.
is
I
the
mean,
most complicated. And then you can use chaperones.
there are chaperone proteins that
Yeah,
help,
but
but
how does that information get coded such that the protein has? I mean, if that protein is misfolded, it may work, but it also can cause death, right? I mean, you can die from
it's
misfolded proteins.
I would say it's 90 to 95% inherent in the sequence, but it's not completely. So you can have the same protein that folds in two different ways, and that's one of the mysteries that we're still not
It's
sure about.
why what caused? I mean, I understand the conformational changes, but why would a like a same
Well,
protein
that's where
fold?
the chaperone molecules come in, and sometimes proteins, uh, as they are synthesized, they go directly from the ribosome to some other structure, like a receptor complex,
Hmm.
and that also aids in the folding and the final conformation of the protein. But that's a fascinating process. But the details of the process you described very quickly, how the ribosome
It's
actually
ridiculously
works,
complicated.
are staggeringly, incredibly complex and worth discussing,
That's why I only have
because
a very basic
all of that
understanding.
has to. Sorry.
This is why I say I only have a very basic understanding, because I
Yeah,
have looked at that stuff and I know enough to know I don't know shit beyond maybe first tier stuff. Okay.
yeah, and the thing that's most amazing is that the error rate is 0.00001% in the process, which is
Yeah,
incredibly
I think
low.
with overall error correction, it starts off with there's like three things for error correction. One gets down to 10 to the minus sixth, and then it gets
Yeah,
down to the negative eighth, and it gets down to 10 to the negative ninth. But that still leads some replication errors. But anyways, I know it's getting late. I wanted to keep this down to an
yeah.
hour. So, Dr. Gart, appreciate it. This was awesome.
Thanks,
I'm a
Steve.
huge fan. You know that, and I'll fight for you tooth and nail because we're friends on Twitter, and I'll call you out when I think you're wrong, but I'll definitely back you when I think you're right.
And that's
But
completely mutual, as you know.
yeah, and I
So,
would hope to, because I want my science to be correct. And if I put forth something that is incorrect when it comes to the biology or chemistry, I see. I don't get upset when somebody says like, "Hey, Steve, yeah, you got your biochemistry wrong." I'll be like, "Oh, I probably did." Right? Let me correct that. Right?
and
I
that's
think that's
how
what
I
you have
am
to
for
do.
philosophy. So,
Yeah, no, like I said, it takes a community, and I think that when people, make mistakes and they don't like admitting to it, it just doesn't do any good. You don't learn anything from it. And I see a lot of times both theist and atheist fall into that trap. They don't want to give any ground or give any quarter, thinking that they're giving their opponent some ammo, or they're giving them some ground.
Yeah,
And by doing that, I think they shoot themselves in the foot by doing that.
I agree.
But anyways, thanks guys for watching. Leave comments in the video description. I know this is kind of a short one and kind of a quick one. We didn't have time to plan a lot of this out. Next one we do, I think I'm going to be doing a little more detail. We'll get more in the science. But go check out my blog, www.greatdebatecommunity.com. The one I wrote the other day was on can we believe and not believe at the same time. Not an easy read per se, but you know what? People that have read it said they think it's good. Ozzy's found it interesting, and if I get Ozzy to say that it's not shit, then I'm happy. Okay, so thank you guys. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.